Hello, everybody. This is Rick Will, and today I want to talk about Steven Universe. Back in 2015 to around 2018, you couldn't get me to shut up about this show. If I was doing YouTube back then, all my videos would be about Steven Universe. I was obsessed. I'd watch reactions, AMVs, trailer breakdowns, character tier lists, whatever I could get my hands on. I was a super fan. Though when the show first came out in 2013, I was admittedly a hater. The commercials and Steven's initial personality being the main things that put me off. It didn't look like the kind of show I'd be interested in. I'd watch it here and there, mostly out of order, and mainly still unimpressed until late season 1 episodes like The Test, On the Run, and Warp Tour. That got me heavily invested in the stories, the characters, etc. I will admit I took it a bit too far at times. Back in Steven Universe's peak, I was unhealthily obsessed with the show. I didn't want to hear any criticism, any nitpicks, nothing. I thought this show was perfect, and anyone who didn't think it was one of the best shows of all time and the best show on TV were idiots. I wasn't the only one either. Steven Universe's fan base would get very toxic back in its prime, but luckily with time people have cooled down and realized it has flaws just like any other series. Also, there's the whole smear campaign against the show back in the day, with people using misinformation and bad faith arguments to push hate disguised as criticism, which beat the fan base to near death. Being a Steven Universe fan in the late 2010s to early 2020s was almost considered a war crime by people outside the fan base. Luckily, most of that has blown over, and most people acknowledge the show as mostly good, but with some flaws and some missed potential. This isn't a proper review, it's just what I think about Steven Universe. Steven Universe revolves around the titular Steven Quartz universe, a half-human, half-gem hybrid, the first and only in history. Gems are sentient gemstones that project light and make it tangible to give them a proper form. Steven's mother, Rose Quartz, was the leader of a group called the Crystal Gems, who protected the Earth from magical creatures. Rose had to give up her physical form to give birth to Steven and exist solely as the source of his gem powers, her gem becoming his essentially. Steven spends the first few years of his life living with his dad Greg in his van before being taken in by the remaining crystal gems so he can train to be a defender of Earth. From there, Steven trains to gain better control of his powers and eventually goes on missions with the crystal gems to protect the Earth, while trying to live up to his mom's reputation. The series also follows him as he meets and befriends people around the sleepy seaside beach city, usually bringing magical gem mayhem to the otherwise mundane town. For the first half of the first season, the show portrays the gems as more ancient mythical guardians of Earth. But as the story progresses, you find out the gems are aliens from a far-off planet they call Homeworld, which makes several things in Season 1A not make much sense in hindsight and several things unexplained. But anyway, gems were initially sent to take over the planet and drain it of its resources, which would cause the extinction of all life on the planet. Rose Quartz fell in love with the Earth, from the plants and animals to eventually the people, to the idea that Earth could be their new home away from their oppressive higher-end commands and live in peace. Rebelling and winning came with a grave cost as the Diamonds, the leaders of Homeworld, used their powers to turn most of the rebel gems into corrupted versions of themselves, basically going insane from the process, as well as many crystal gems being experimented on and turned into forced fusion amalgamations during the war. The main conflict of the series is Steven learning more about gems in the past and fighting to stop the Diamonds and their lackeys from returning and destroying the Earth, not even wanting it for its resources anymore, simply just to destroy it for good. This show had me hooked. I won't get into every plot twist and every twist and turn, but for the most part I'd say the story was very good. The concept of gems, the world building, the character development, there's a lot to love. The character development of all the main and supporting characters is top notch. You see them at their worst, at some points even wonder if they want to be the good guys or just have an obligation to protect humans because it's what Rose wanted. And you see them at their best as they grow and change. You see the infighting and betrayals and see they're not the perfect team Steven thought they were, and how the loss of Rose took a huge toll on all of them in their own ways. But they become a stronger team through all of it. Amethyst, from the immature wild child with inferiority issues to arguably the most mature of the group. Pearl, from spiteful and neurotic and only really caring about Earth because Rose told her to becoming more independent and moving on from her grief and finding the joys in Earth in humanity. It's a very thematically rich series. Themes of self-identity, individualism, relationships, platonic, romantic, parental, you name it. Empathy and understanding, freedom, so on and so forth. There's many layers to this story and they run very deep. The main thing the show gets criticized for is its pacing and erratic airing schedule. Near the end of season 1, Cartoon Network started releasing episodes in batches, unofficially dubbed Steven Bombs by the fan base. These were usually 5 episodes dropped all at once before the series went back on indefinite hiatus. It got so bad that airing new episodes weekly for 1 month was promoted as a special event for the series. Though you could argue they made up for it with the Summer of Steven event where a new episode aired weekly for 1 month. But this airing format hurt the series more than helped it. The series started off with a nice balance of Beach City episodes, exploring Steven's human side, and gym-related plots for progressing Steven's training and becoming a proper crystal gem. The Beach City plots usually still incorporating some kind of gym technology or creature that causes mayhem and needs to be stopped. After a while, the series started separating the two sides of Steven's life more and more to the point most people found the Beach City, or Townie episodes as they called them, bland and mundane and detracting from the actually interesting stuff. And it's kinda hard to argue with them. You could go from an episode where Steven recaps several plot points that we already know, to his new gym friends, and at the end of the episode they're about to explore gym colonies on another planet, to then go to a mockumentary style episode following a band in Beach City and you never see the gym stuff be explored. It would help if most of the Townie episodes were grouped together or were really funny, but it's more hit or miss.
Doo-doo. But the government corrupts.
There are some standout episodes like the last one out of Beach City and Future Boy Zoltron that I really like, but in general the Townie episodes do hold back the series quite a bit. Coupled with the Steven Bomb format and waiting months for new episodes just to get something like Onion Gang and then disappear again, it's probably not as much of a problem watching the show after it's finished and can binge, but being a Steven Universe fan during its run was a true test of will. Another thing usually brought up is the rushed ending of the OG series. The 5th season of Steven Universe serves as the end of the original run of this series, before being followed by a made-for-television movie and a sequel limited series called Steven Universe Future. Halfway through season 5, Steven finds out that Rose Quartz, leader of the Crystal Gems, was actually Pink Diamond, one of the leaders of Homeworld, and that she disguised herself to fight and protect the planet after falling in love with it. This has a varied reaction from most of the Crystal Gems, except for Pearl, who knew the whole time, but was sworn to secrecy before faking an assassination of Pink Diamond to scare the Homeworld Gems off of Earth. The Diamonds confront the Crystal Gems personally after all this time, and Steven tells them the truth, who are more than willing to forgive Pink so they can have their little sister back after presuming her dead for 1,000 years. Steven goes to Homeworld and hopes to convince their leader White Diamond too, after a lot of brainwashing and attempted murder, of course. Once all that didn't work, White Diamond relents and helps uncorrupt the gems on Earth, and that's how the season ends. Very rushed, yes, but all the story beats make sense for the most part, and still felt like a satisfying conclusion to me. The Diamonds' babyface turn is pretty awkward, but makes sense and isn't really a redemption. The Diamonds only get along with Steven because he's Pink Diamond. The main source of their hatred for the planet was the thought that Pink was killed there, and their guilt for giving her the planet in the first place. If Steven wasn't Pink Diamond, the show would have ended with the Diamonds squashing Steven and the rest of the Crystal Gems in the episode Reunited. The show makes them more complex than just mustache-twirling villains, but never feels like they're just forgiven for all the wrong they've done. Steven mostly just tolerates them and needs their help to undo as much of the damage as they can, so I'm not really sure why people wanted them killed or held prisoner for eternity or whatever. Fixing shattered gems is questionable. It makes sense since early in the series we've seen Gem Shards and Paired Out explains that they look for the missing parts of themselves trying to make themselves whole. And the forced fusion experiments are basically gem shards stuck together, so it would make sense that Diamonds could fix it if all the pieces were together. But for most of the series, shattering was considered the closest thing to death a gem could face. To undo it just feels wrong, even if it makes sense. And finally, I want to talk about Steven Universe Future. Future is the epilogue series that explores what Steven is up to after there's not really anyone left to fight. It's about Steven coming to terms with his feelings about his mother after finding out about her deception. Him looking back at all he's done and how it's affected his mental state, and what he wants out of life. This was a very good character study for Steven, albeit a little hard to watch at times. Though I am on the fence on one thing. I'm not really a fan of turning most of the series beforehand and the adventures into a bunch of piled up trauma. The whole Steven was a child soldier who had a terrible upbringing and didn't realize until it was all over thing. To the point Steven wishes he had a more quiet, mundane life than the adventures he craved as a kid. It recontextualizes and kinda undermines most of the OG series into a bad thing that shouldn't have happened. Other shows have done similar things, like Fiona and Cake Season 1 saying going on adventures like Finn and Jake is a bad thing and you should want a nice, peaceful, quiet life, which goes against the idea of Adventure Time. I mean, it's literally called Adventure Time. It works for some shows that go that route from the beginning, but I'm torn on how Steven Universe Future does it. But all in all, I think Steven Universe is a very good cartoon. Its highs are as high as I've seen TV shows go, and its lows usually never tread too low. The worst is some rush pacing, some boring episodes, and some wasted potential. Hopefully if you had any misgivings about the series, this video helped change your mind about some things. With all that being said, I'm Rick Will, and I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.